Hello, it's great that you're here with us today for the second JCU Humanisms and Beyond lecture. And yes, we've started this lecture series as part of John Cabot University in order to have an informed understanding of the history of the concept of humanism, because right now we're living in a period of time where we're transcending humanism, where we're transcending humanism in various ways. We've got transhumanism, we've got critical post-humanism, there's also meta-humanism. There are various movements, which all of them are interested in transcending humanism in a specific way. But what do we know? What humanism stands for? How can we transcend? How can we move beyond the limits of humanism without knowing exactly what humanism stands for? So, any good informed understanding of what is possible for the future needs to have an understanding of the past. And the past, there are various different notions and concepts of humanism which we have applied. And so, as part of the lecture series, we'll get confronted with what humanism stands for and with various notions which have been applied by philosophers, by theologians, by intellectuals of the past who've dealt with the concept of humanism. And, and this has implications for all different realms of the academic fields and departments, and also for finding a new way of dealing with the humanities. Humanities is based on some notion of humanism. So the entire channel is dedicated to the meta-humanities in the sense of we're moving beyond a traditional understanding of the humanities in order to find a new beginning, to look out for something new in the future. And so an informed understanding of the past is needed in order to come to a new future. And today I'm very happy that we have Professor Brunella Antomarini here with us, who's going to give her presentation. And she's an expert on contemporary philosophy, on aesthetics, on philosophy of art in particular. And Professor Fabrizio Conti will present her further, with whom I'm organizing this event together.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you, all of you, to be here. We are really thrilled. I mean, we are really happy and glad to have this opportunity today to listen, to Brunella Antomarini, Professor Brunella Antomarini. She's going to talk about Leibniz, Teleology, or prehistory of cybernetics, about which I'm really happy to learn more. And we are also happy, very happy, to have with us Professor Aziza Al-Hibri, Professor Emerita from the University of Richmond, School of Law, and a philosopher herself. So I think that we are going to have a really lively discussion afterwards. I'm really looking forward to that. But I will leave the floor to Professor Antomarini, and thank you again for this great opportunity, and looking forward to that. Professor Antomarini, please.
Thank you, Fabrizio, and thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Aziza. I hope this will be a fruitful discussion about what Stefan introduced as a kind of anti-humanistic series, lecture series. So what's wrong with humanism? What's wrong with humanism is the illusion that humans have a specific or special place in the universe. One of these possible illusions can be called rationalism. As all of you know, rationalism was a strong current in philosophy of the 16th, 17th century, mainly represented by René Descartes, who introduces the notion of reason, or emphasizes or analyzes the notion of reason as a specific, unique tool of the human mind. Of course, his reference is the new science that is called physics, introduced by Galileo, and Galileo introducing measurement in nature, which was unthinkable before, through experimentation. He shows that whatever happens in nature can be quantified, can be measured. And this is, according to Descartes, who justifies metaphysically the new science called physics, this is a gift of the human reason. Now, is it true? Is it true? The next generation, that is Leibniz and Spinoza especially, find there's something wrong with it. What's wrong with it? The fact that reason or the mind should be placed somewhere in the human, in human what? In human body. It is not in the human body. It is not out there. So this strange concept of the mind starts becoming criticized, analyzed by Leibniz and Spinoza in different ways. Because what's wrong, what they find wrong with it is the fact that there's one mind on the one side and nature on the other side. So the structure of the theory of knowledge is we have this subject placed outside of nature that is able to measure and understand and know nature as if nature were there as a passive object in the hands of this subject. This is called the dualism. This dualism implies that where's the substance, where's the essence of things, etc. So whereas Spinoza tries to materialize the mind, Leibniz tries to spiritualize matter in order to reach a monism that puts a remedy to the dualism. How is it possible to have two distinct substances? This is the basics of rationalism. But Leibniz, fascinating author, fascinating non-systematic philosopher, who is in his turn fascinated by anything that comes to his mind. He writes in fragments and bits and pieces collected posthumously. He's fascinated by Chinese, I Ching, he's fascinated by calculus. He makes himself a machine, we'll see that in a minute, a calculator, one of the first calculators. He's fascinated by atomism. However, he criticizes the existence of atomism exactly because if matter in itself is inert, how to explain the fact that things exist? Why something rather than nothing? And here we approach the notion of teleology, that is what Descartes had dismissed, and Spinoza too, is the fact that nature has a telos, nature has a final cause or a finality. Descartes says if we want to be serious, we must find causes and not reasons and not aims. Nature doesn't have an aim if it works like a machine, like a blind machine moved from outside, like a clock. Leibniz is not satisfied with that and thinks that if things exist rather than not, if they don't go awry but are kept together by themselves, there must be a force that is inside of nature. So force, mind, energy, they exist in one and only natural essence that is common to the mind and matter and the force. All of this sounds metaphysical, sounds typical of a philosopher who doesn't like to write systems but likes to think freely. This is his fascination. And it results in the invention or discovery, invention for sure, it's an invention of the monads. Leibniz says if it were true that nature is made of atoms, which are merely made of shape and size and inert matter, how to explain the fact that things are different from one another? They move, they adjust to one another. Therefore, he replaces these material blind atoms with monads, which are would consist of quanta, today would say, of energy. It's a pure energy. All of these results are perfectly rational. This is why we call him a rationalist. But at the same time, as Kant noticed later, they have only one flaw: they do not exist. So all of these metaphysical illusion last until cybernetician, that is the father of cybernetics, Norbert Wiener, says, and here we go with our PowerPoint, says about Leibniz: if I were to choose a patron saint of cybernetics out of the history of science, I should have to choose Leibniz. All of this reshapes, reconfigures all the way we could consider Leibniz, rather than a rationalist who believes in this abstract notion of reason, who thinks that the mind is the only force to move something else that is called matter. He starts becoming plausible. That is, Leibniz monads, Leibniz notion of living force may have been just metaphysical until Wiener. But after Wiener, we can reconsider it. We can reconsider Leibniz idea. So this is Wiener on about cybernetics. If the older machines and old automata function as a clockwork, modern automatic machines possess sense organs. Cybernetics is the pathfinder of AI, electronics, computer, interconnection, etc. If it doesn't reach to that, it's because of the AI, electronics overpowered the cybernetic tools. That is receptor for messages coming from the outside. What is this machine? That is not only a machine, it's not just mechanical, but it is, metaphorically speaking, possessing sense organs in that it reacts to the environment. Of course, the research by Wiener and these, colleagues all along the Macy conferences aimed at finding an equivalent, at reconstructing a kind of inverse engineering, reconstructing the mind, how the brain works. Of course, until now, we know the differences between computers, between AI and real brains. The ones are based on hardwares, the second are called the wetwares, because we are chemically moved, whereas electronics is still, at least so far, just physics, just a matter of physics. But in any case, from Wiener on, the research goes into finding these kinds of machines that work by themselves, that do not need any external force, any external mind in order to move. So it is as if the mind were inside of the machines themselves. So this is what Wiener finds common with Leibniz. The calculus, that is, thinking can be projected onto machines, which by having sense organs or reacting to the environment can calculate the solution to problems, and that the calculation can go on without any external mind, without any human mind. That is the meaning of automatic. So what Wiener finds interesting in Leibniz is the research on combination of numbers, combination of symbols, which can result into a solution that is mathematical and therefore automatic. All of these needs technologies, of course. So thinking becomes, from being this natural theological gift, can be simply a technique, a technology. Thinking is a technology as well as speaking is a technology. Second common feature is the automaton. The automaton that is a kind of machine that is not just working mechanically. We know that from Vaucanson and so many other inventors of automata. We have even Ero from Alexandria, we are talking about the early Greek times. Automata were always the case, out of surprise and, something, innovation or more surprise than innovation. But now the automata are given the chance to have an inner dynamics that reproduces motion and therefore choice without any external intervention. All of this implies what? That there's inside of matter, inside the automaton itself, there must be an energy that makes it work autonomously. A force which is reflective. Reflective means that the machine receives inputs, receives stimulus from the environment, reacts to it, and makes decisions. So this is a first information theory, information technology. The machine reacts or retroacts to what the environment says. It is recursive, which means that the machine retroacting to the environment works by repeating and by correcting, adjusting to what the environment says. So recursive means self-referential. It doesn't need to know the environment so much as much as it needs to react to the environment for what it needs to react to. This is a self-regulating force, and this also implies that there's a mutual reaction or mutual adjustment between different forces, between different systems, between different machines or technologies. And this is, another quote that should. What is this machine that is able to react to the environment as if it had sense organs? And this is called the palomilla, invented by Wiener himself. We know that we have maybe before palomilla, William Gray Walter invented Elsie and then invented Cora. All of these machines are gradually developing these so-called sense organs. What are these sense organs? It's actually a phototropic ability, phototropic structure of the machine to absorb light, which makes its wires swell to the point that it moves. When the wires swell too much, it stops. By stopping, it needs the wires go back to inside, and therefore it needs again to find more light to move, and so on and so forth. This recursive, this constant retroaction is what makes palomilla look like, palomilla is the name of a butterfly, look like the behavior of the human cybernetic nature, let's say. How to exemplify the human body moves cybernetically. That is, when we walk, at every step, we correct ourselves, and our motion, our movements are recursive in the sense that we do not know too much to the right, because when going to the right, our systems, including the ear, the skeleton, the muscles, tell us, because we are informed by the floor, by the air, by the environment, how much we have to move to the left. All of this is, implies micro movements. That is what we call equilibrium. Our natural organic equilibrium corresponds to the homeostatic homeostasis, that is the equilibrium looked for by the by Palomilla. Ashby will invent the homeostat, and so on. We can go on like this. This is the inspiration. This is what Wiener finds as a first inspiration. This is what Leibniz invented. The stepped reckoner, or also called the stepped drum, because it's made of many drums. You can see here many gears, each of them corresponding to a solution of a mathematical problem, also called the calculus ratiocinator. Presented at the London Royal Society in 1673. Also, Leibniz wanted to call it superior to man. So again, we don't have anymore the claim that man has something to say that nature is not able to say. And this is how it works. I found it in Wikipedia. I find it very clarifying. That is, the machine, the gear, goes on calculating through a yes/no. You see here the no. We have a certain 0, and then we have 1, 1, 1, no, no, no. All of this looks very much as the sequences of on-off states, which is common to the binary logic used by computers. So we have this 0 and 1, which is the main tool computers use, the infinite combination of zeros and ones, which is not possible in Leibniz times. It became possible because of the extreme speed with which computers can calculate. And this is the famous phrase by Leibniz, calculons, let's calculate. Let's calculate means once that we find this automatic way of reasoning, we won't need anymore to argue, to fight upon what is true and what is false, because the truth will be found out by this kind of infinite combination of numbers. This is what we call the mathesis universalis. It is rational, not so much because the mind, the human mind expresses it, but it is rational because it is a symbolic, it is a communication tool, it is a sign. It reminds closely the sign system that much later was developed by semiotics, from Peirce to Eco. It's not by chance that in the 60s, cybernetics was still, decade later, still very famous, and Silvio Ceccato, Eco's professor, teacher, or Roland Barthes, even Heidegger knew it very well, knew this claim that cybernetically can we know reality. Roland Barthes, I was impressed by that, thought that Plato's diairesis is a cybernetic tool, because according to Plato, we can distinguish things by these yes, no, 0, 1 distinctions, which is not the way in which we reason. But, also cybernetics starts becoming a kind of metaphor for the automatic reasoning. Now it's interesting that Leibniz source is not so much, or not only mathematics, but also I Ching, this book of changes, this oracle, which Father Bouvet, Jesuit, brought from China. And the second source is Leibniz's appreciation of the technicians, inventors of automata. They were called, with some scorn and contempt, les mécaniciens. Descartes himself didn't appreciate these people who were technicians, worked with their hands, inventing and making machines. But Descartes' studio was Descartes' laboratory had a room for the technicians, because technique is inseparable from science, given experiments. So this is what Father Bouvet gave Leibniz as a gift. And this is the I Ching, a 64 combination of lines, which make the possible combinations of ideas and solutions to problems. And this is a Leibniz dream, which remains a dream. Why remain a dream? Why? Because this infinite combination of 0 and 1 cannot reach too much unless we have a computer. So we have too small a number of combinations in order to transform this mathematics into a logic. But the idea of an infinite combinations of symbols that should lead to the truth can be seen as a continuism. What does it mean? If whatever we find in nature can be infinitely combined, this means that things in the world are not discrete and discontinuous, but they are continuous. That is, if we make any kind of random dots on a surface, we will always find a rule according to which we can find, without any jump, rationally fill in the gaps. That is, turn these dots into a continuum. It would be possible to find a notional rule or equation that would generate this continuous. Why is it so important to find the continuum? Because the continuum means that the combination of symbols corresponds in the Cartesian sense, but are actually what happens in nature. That is, everything can be turned into everything else, given a rule. This reminds us of an algorithm, and this is in fact what comes to my mind. This encoder distinguishes, this is pattern recognition, distinguishes between objects, but I like this image because in this image the objects are partially superimposed. So it's not just differences between one object and the others, but every object has something in common with any other objects. This is what Simon Don will call much later reticulation or rhizome, where rhizomes may be something different. Also makes me think of the topological object, topology, in which without any external intervention, we can find continuously the algorithm that turns one object into another, the torus mag example. So the second reason why Wiener recalls Leibniz as his pathfinder and father is the fact that therefore there must be an inner dynamics which reproduces motion. This was a usual, this was a famous dispute at the time, whether force is inert and dead or living and retroacting, as the cybernetician would say. That is matter moved from outside, or does it move by itself? According to Leibniz, it must move, matter must move itself. The scholastics, he said, were too much worried about the properties of bodies. We can also think of Descartes saying bodies have shape, size, and motion, as if they were inert again. But they never bothered about to find how the bodies worked, which means that the body has an inner algorithm, we would say today, as an inner rule according to which it can work. Can we think of Palomilla again? In the monadology, he says that there must be, therefore, every organic body is like a divine machine or natural automaton. So this is Leibniz being the first organologist, if we want to use again Kangian, if I'm not wrong, the first one to use this term, followed by Stigler, etc. Organology means that whatever exists as an organic whole, or if we want to follow the next generation of cybernetics, a system, and has a systemic relationship with any other system. So what is a body? A natural automaton, which means that the opposite of what Descartes meant. Descartes says, if I see a human body, I think of a machine. Leibniz, reversing Descartes, says, if I see an automaton, I think that inside of the automaton there must be an energy, an intrinsic energy. What is the difference between a machine and the machines of nature or organism? This is wonderful. The difference is that the organic machines are infinite machines. My organism is made of many infinite machines, to the different organs, to the cells, to the molecules, to the atoms, that makes machines inside of machines infinitely. And this is why he says there must exist monads. Of course, it's not just an argument. It doesn't have any possibility to make experiments about that. So what are they? There must be many different substances. So Descartes said the one only substance, matter. He says, no, there must be many substances that are this living matter. And this is the translation of the principle of the indiscernibles. If atoms existed, they wouldn't be able to explain the differences in qualities, the differences that exist in nature. If something is not discernible, it is exactly as something else. But there are many differences. This is the multifariousness of nature must be explained. How do monads explain it? Because monads are absolutely closed inside of themselves, because they do not change. They are kind of equivalent of atoms. They are pure energy, and they are like mirrors. Mirrors means that they mirror one another, they adjust with one another, and they are different from one another. They can be as simple as an energy that moves just by repulsion attraction. This is very close to the electrons, and by becoming more and complex, or clearer and clearer, they arrive to be the monads that are on base of freedom, thinking, reasoning, and consciousness. So he solves the problem of matter by giving matter the possibility or the necessity of having an energy, but this energy can or is distributed by degrees. So there are nets or webs of monads that must, again argumentatively, must explain why things exist, and if they exist, there must be a sufficient reason to exist. And here we approach the notion of telos. How come that these monads, however closed in themselves, they don't have windows, which is the most imaginative of qualities of these monads? How come that they adjust to one another to the point of making the microscopic world? There must be some kind of ability to exist and to keep themselves together. We'll see how this is not metaphysical anymore now. So these organisms, which are automata as infinite machines, actually are the evidence that they are constructed, built upon monads, because organisms, if they are called such, and if they are infinite machines, they are machines with a telos. They do have the aim to exist. This is the equivalent of Spinoza's conatus. So there must be a pre-established harmony. At one point, Wiener says, well, of course, I cannot accept Leibniz's pre-established harmony, because the pre-established implies still the intervention of God, so something external. But why don't we try to interpret this as homeostasis, that is the self-regulation of nature? Nature does regulate itself. It's not just a random machinery that works blindly. So monads, if we want to make monads following Wiener, something that is not just metaphysical but understandable, explainable, we de-ontologize them, and we do not think of them as entities, but we can think of them as systems. System theory, I'm thinking of Luhmann, sociologist, I'm thinking of Varela and Maturana, that is the biological model of a system. A cell is a system, so a cell could be an equivalent of monad, however a cell is material too. But how come that a cell has organelle which work with one another so well? How come that an organelle, which is the equivalent of an organ, seems to have been an organism which enters a cell, a protokaryote, and instead of being destroyed by the cell, starts collaborating with the cell, starts entering an endosymbiosis with the cell. I'm quoting from Lynn Margulis. So the fact that there's an energy inside of matter that makes the matter works by itself can be the update of Leibniz monads if we redefine it as a system. It is purely relational, where systems are relational. I have my organic system, I have my psychological system, we have a social system, we have a political system. All of these systems are purely relational. They are not material entities. They have an energy in themselves. Their aim, as Luhmann says, is to reproduce themselves. We have the system of art. Why do we have art? Because the system needs to reproduce itself. So all of this implies the existence of an aim, which is not spiritual, which is not rational, which is not mental, but exists inside of matter. They adjust to one another. They adjust to one another means that what if we want to explain the existence of nature as something that keeps itself together, there must be this constant adjusting to one, coupling as Luhmann would call it. So there are teleological degrees, as we said before. Palomilla has one kind of teleology. It simply is attracted and repulsed by what it finds in front of itself or herself. Electrons are these minimum monads, because electrons seem to release the atoms. The atom seems to release or get an electron in order to keep a homeostasis. Is this telos? Is this a name? Very difficult to say, but it's not by chance that physicists themselves can use only the expression of, say, in order to. In order to is a telos, is a final cause. So spiritual and material do not exist as a dualistic separation, body and soul, particle and wave. This is where Wiener, in this short essay called Back to Leibniz, referred to monads. A particle wave, we know from Heisenberg on, they cannot be really distinguished, and monads may mean that. This is the self-motion and self-regulation, perpetuum mobile, already envisaged by Leonardo. You see that the effect, you see that the hit that one wheel, that one gear give to the other one is cause for the motion of the other one. This is what in cybernetics is called the effector. That is, the effect causes more effects, and therefore we do not need any external cause. What seems to be inertia is actually an active force proacting on a cause and seems to have an aim. Of course, in this case, the illusion of aim is just an illusion, or maybe all aims are just illusions, but they cannot be avoided. So we have a force vive, a living force, which doesn't need spiritualism or vitalism, and we have effects retroacting on causes, which would explain the activity of the monads adjusting to one another with any need for a second entity or a second principle. Force vive, just this force is something different from size, shape, and motion. This is against Descartes. There must be a behavior in bodies that involve a concept of force. So force is together with matter. Remains the question, why are these of matter? This is wonderful. Why something rather than nothing? Why these laws of matter that allows matter to exist? There must be something inside of matter. This is nice, it's just a joke. If we expel the final cause, it would be as though in explaining a great princess victory in a successful siege, a historian were to say it was because the small particles of gunpowder released by the touch of spark. This is funny because if we reduce the victory to causes, we find some kind of reductio ad absurdum. So in order to understand the efficient cause, the external cause, which is the inertia, we must, and this is Descartes and Newton, the action-reaction, force morte, we have to add the final cause or sufficient reason as a living force. If we don't, we remain with an emptiness of explanation about the reason why nature suffices to itself. It's sufficient to itself. We do not need any God, or we have God in the machine, or we have God in the infinity of machines that is organic life, that is life. I just quote here Émilie du Châtelet, but because Châtelet translated Newton, contributing to Newton's success in France, and she's being a physicist herself. She says, Mr. Newton, however, a genius, is wrong because Leibniz is right. How can we dispel the living force if we find this equilibrium that is produced by the disequilibrium that is produced by the equilibrium, and so on and so forth. So there is a plasticity of matter, and this is why the monads are also called entelechies, which reminds the existence of a cell. I mentioned butterfly, octopus, and beehives because of this wonder of how nature makes itself in beauty and perfection. Now, one last problem, because we finished. What about contingency? At one point, Wiener says, yes, but Leibniz cannot be totally accepted because of the pre-established harmony. The world doesn't find always the same equilibrium. The equilibrium changes continuously. The future is never the same as the past. But here's Leibniz, or this new Leibniz answer. These substances obstruct or limit one another. They act on one another. They adjust themselves to one another, so to speak, and all of this is contingent, we can conclude. That since each person and each substance is like a little world that expresses the larger world, anything that happens within a substance belongs to the general order of the universe. So if we can say the universe, it's not because we are talking about anything that doesn't lack a chaos. Of course, there's always chaos, but this chaos becomes an instrument to always reach for a new kind of homeostasis. Leibniz himself is aware of this. Can we destroy the difference between contingent and necessary truth? And this is his solution. I say that whatever happens in accordance with its antecedent is assured but not necessary. So Leibniz provides for an explanation of this. It seems this is a new experimentation in cosmology. It seems that galaxies rotate in mutual sync. find this fantastically Leibnizian. That is, the fact that galaxies rotate in sync is not necessary. They can explode, the sun will explode, but the synchronicity exists. This mutual adjusting of everything with everything else must have an internal force. This is Peirce, who by criticizing Leibniz, actually, he reinforces it. We do not need to add telos to existing things. Existing things are reasons themselves. Conclusion, let's translate the principle of sufficient reason or living force as the effector. That is, we do not have just a blind mechanical cause, but we have an active effect that produces new energy, like water on a rock is not just hitting the rock, but it produces more energy, etc. The indiscernibles, there must be a plurality of substances, there must be systems and systemic relationships between things. Pre-established harmony, continuism, we can translate it into homeostasis, the constant looking for an homeostasis, and a constant interconnectedness that we know exists now. This is just a final example of how Leibniz, differently from other philosophers like Descartes, appreciated the works of technicians, the works of artisans, because this free activity, even in children exercises, which could surpass the greatest mathematician, in these free activities of making machines, we discover the secret of living force. I conclude with this wonderful statement: there is nothing in the universe that does not touch us. Everything touches everything else, everything adjusts with everything else. Thank you.
What a wonderful presentation.
I hope it was not too
Brunella.
long.
Let us just add all of us to the stream again. So, yes, firstly, someone's not using headphones. We've got a feedback mechanism here, unfortunately.
How can I? Okay.
There's one question which directly came to my mind. It was just a side comment at the very beginning, which you made, where you said we've always sort of language has been a technology, but it's also a technique. And then you said sort of you used both concepts, technology as well as technique. And I was curious to hear how you distinguish technology and techniques, and what's the difference of the meaning of these two concepts, because there are several different options concerning how these can be distinguished. Sort of on the one hand, sometimes we use technique as something, a bodily technique, but the technology is something external. In other ways, sometimes we use technology as a logos, as the thinking about the arts, where about the technologies, whereby the techniques are the arts themselves. So there are many different options. So I'm curious what you have to say.
They're related, of course. A technology needs a technique. A technology is the result of a technique, as well as Google is the result of an algorithm. Okay, so the algorithm is the technique, the technology is the result. The technologies can be material, in fact. A technique is the rule according to which a technology can be accomplished. Articulate language is a technology that results from grammar and syntax, and grammar and syntax are the techniques. Can we say that?
Yes. This definitely makes sense. Fabrizio, there were some questions, and yes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, many questions came to my mind after your presentation, Brunella. Really, thank you for this. I mean, for this presentation, for these words. This is really engaging. I mean, I have the idea that Leibniz was really a smart guy. I mean, we can say for sure, with so many interests. And my question starts from this point. I mean, can we still consider him as a as a sort of polymath, as a Renaissance man. I mean, because of the many interests that he actually had. I mean, so yeah, this would be
absolutely.
my question. Yeah.
Yes, a kind of Renaissance man, very close to Leonardo. Actually, he looks like a Leonardo who goes to Paris as a diplomat, stays there I think a few years, and these few years is able to invent anything. He invents so much. You know, this fascination for China is interesting. You know, Father Duvay. In fact, I found, not by chance, maybe one who rereads Wiener and Leibniz in this way is a Yukui, young Chinese philosopher. Absolutely, Leibniz is interesting today exactly because it doesn't consider so much to the need to specialize. It's not a special; it's a generalist. So it's a real philosopher. I was actually said that in the YouTube channel there was a very interesting misprint. Instead of teleology, it was written teleology. So a friend said, Nefeli said, but actually it makes sense because, you know, it's a kind of gymnastics of the mind. These free gymnastics of the mind. Aristotle himself said that philosophy must be not productive. It's the most unproductive of all disciplines, exactly because it implies freedom of thinking. The end of itself of the invention of thinking, if thinking is an invention. This is why Leibniz is absolutely one of the fathers of the so-called continental philosophy, which Stefan doesn't like.
I don't like. This is not the case. No.
No, in fact, Leibniz could be another Nietzsche, okay? Similar to Nietzsche. This non-academic concern that make both of them really free thinkers. Wonderful.
So let's also include, as a further, another philosopher we have here on board, Aziz Al-Hibri. So it's a great pleasure having you here with us. So I want to include you in the further discussions we're having.
Thank you, Aziza, for coming.
Thank you very much. I must say that it has given me a lot of food for thought, and I'm really thinking that maybe one day I could present a complementary view of what you're saying, Professor Antomarini, and maybe we can then share a discussion together. Absolutely. But I find this extremely perceptive and extremely important as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Do you have any questions? I don't know.
We have had quite a few questions actually in the chat, so that's why let me come to the first question, which was raised by Nefeli Professor Misuraka. So this is the first part of the question. The
Antikythera
mechanism.
Human input, but you find it has potential cybernetic thought. It's simply a mechanism. Yes, one of the first.
Let me just, because this was only the first part of the question. Let me present the second part.
The method is what I mean is that was there some sort of cybernetic behind it? Was human calculation? Thanks. Can be read exactly the other way around. Isn't human calculation just the part, could be part of the cybernetic thought that the Antikythera or the what was called the Eulipila by Hero of Alexandria showed to have? That is, aren't we projecting ourselves on the machines, thinking that we are making the machines? But it couldn't be exactly the opposite. The existence of the Antikythera or of the Eulipila, which moves by themselves, Greek times, couldn't be the evidence that nature moves itself, and we are just part of this self-motion of nature. Nefeli, I don't know if I answered or if you have something else to say.
Yes, if you want to have a further clarification, please put it down in the chat and I will pick it up. And if you have further questions also, please put them down in the chat and we will pick them up. And in particular, sort of this connection between Leibniz and Wiener, and that he was sort of, when you think about cybernetics, when you think about sort of the concept of the cyborg, later on debates concerning the post-human, Leibniz is definitely not the first thinker who comes to mind, no?
Yes, because at that time, science, maybe thanks to Galileo, was considered only inert matter, inanimate matter, as an object of inquiry. Leibniz is the first one to say maybe biology, maybe organisms should be included into science. So it's the first biology, but it's not really biology, because of course even biology tends to consider matter as inert or just chemistry. But why chemistry? Why do we have chemistry?
But there's actually even a close connection sort of from Leibniz via Nietzsche towards the contemporary debates, because actually it might be surprising for many that because Nietzsche in a way also picked up a lot of aspects from the concept of Leibniz monadology. Sort of obviously the monad was no longer such a closed entity which didn't have direct interaction with the other monads. But when Nietzsche used the concept of the power quantum, power quanta, power constellations, and they are like minute entities. And each power quanta has a perspective on the rest of the world, but it's like minute entities which interact with each other. So it was in the same way as Leibniz, it is not a material entity. It's not a material and it's not a mental entity. It's sort of this psychophysiology. As it's sort of the traditional dualistic distinction gets reduced, gets twisted, gets integrated into the new kind of unity between mind and body being connected together, as in Spinozian thought, but now not in the way that it's a little point. And the points, but in difference to Leibniz, the points can grow and can form new organisms and come together. And from Nietzsche, obviously, the connection to Deleuze, to the contemporary thinking in the critical post-humanist tradition is an extremely close one, as well as from Nietzsche to transhumanist traditions.
In fact, what you say makes me think of Deleuze talking about Leibniz in Nietzschean on Nietzschean terms. When he writes the book called The Fold, he has Leibniz as a reference, and the fold means a line that being curved is not an object, but is what he calls an objectile, that is an object with a vectorial direction, with an energy inside. Do we have objects that are not objectiles? We don't have. Even an atom has electrons who turn them into objectiles. Objectiles like projectile, that is objects in motion. So the fold, according to Deleuze, has Leibniz's monad as a first inspiration. Of course, Nietzsche destroys the claim that a truth exists. Leibniz wouldn't. No? There's some difference. But if we turn Leibniz into a cybernetician, we can find behind it the Nietzschean need to dispel, to dismiss any kind of truth that's supposed to be the human claim or a human ability.
But in the case sort of in Nietzsche, we can still have the technique and technology, this dualistic distinction, not existent, and you can integrate that. You can explain why one sees language already as a tool, which is not only a tool in order to reach something, to fulfill a function, but it's also a tool which alters who we are, which gives shape to the organism. So it's not only necessary that techniques get seen as means to realizing goals, a certain telos, a certain fulfilling a function, but that technologies also can be seen as a way of altering us as an organism, altering our way of being in the world. But this would be difficult to explain further on the basis of a monadology, no? I mean, this aspect of
No, I would say that what you call altering, I would call self-producing, self-making. Nature is always an alteration, is always a deformation, like the Mark Torus. No, it's always a deformation of what exists. We don't have nature as something static. It continuously alters itself in search for a homeostasis, for an equilibrium, but the equilibrium exists thanks to the disequilibrium, and therefore it's a constant motion, recursive motion. So when you talk about language, you said language, it's not that language represents, but as you say, language produces nature. So it is the productive theory of language from Humboldt, Herder to Cassirer to semiotics, in the sense of language being an intervention upon nature. It's not just a correspondence. We know now that language does not correspond to what exists, but it produces the existence. So on Nietzschean terms, this is the army of metaphors that language is. On Leibnizian terms, language is the evidence of the infinite recombination of anything that exists.
And this again would also explain sort of a language is a part of a body, our body having been upgraded by means of language. And if we say something by means of a language, there's again it's of course language not as corresponding to something, because there's always still the further interaction. But there's not an interaction with something outside, because there is no outside. It is merely a permanent interaction of everything with everything else.
Exactly.
And this is sort of what one sees from Nietzsche to Deleuze, where it's sort of the any entity is just the sum of all the effects, whereby an effect is no longer produced by the entity, because there is no thing in itself, no?
Exactly. So language is not the representation of what exists. Language produces what exists, not in the sense of spiritualism, but in the sense of constantly reconfiguring the equilibrium that exists in nature. Language intervenes in nature. And, cybernetic machines to computers, to Google, to the global interconnection shows it as an evidence. That is, Google retroacts on us as well as we retroact on Google. So there's a constant, as you say, interaction and retroaction.
That is quite a surprise that language is so useful, no? Because when we say something, it usually works. We manage to communicate. The other persons do what we want them to do. Or, if you order a coffee in an Italian coffee bar, you usually get the coffee. So it has got this practical function. It still exists, even though it's not really representational. Sort of, it's just
performative. There's a language is performative. It performs. It's a performance.
And
also, Brunella, if I can ask you something else. Thinking of Nietzsche, thinking of the role of God, of the death of God, for example. What is the role of God in Leibniz?
Sorry, the role of
God. Where is God? for Leibniz, in his thought?
I'm not understanding you. God.
God, yeah.
God in Leibniz.
Yes.
Very interesting question. For Nietzsche, this is clear. For Leibniz, well, could be said the same as for, Descartes, Spinoza. I think they're actually dismissing God. They do not need God anymore, but they need to say, God as it is, the ones who gave us reason, the ones who is in nature. Spinoza too is quite ambiguous about that. God is nature, nature is God. Concerning Leibniz, of course, he keeps naming God, but once that he says that that life produces itself, do we need God? Do we still need God? God in the details? Yes, could be that God is in the cells, God is in the atoms, God is in the electrons, but at this point are breaking down God into the multiplicity, infinite recombinations of natural artifacts, natural things that Leibniz talks about. So God is always there at that time, in Leibniz time, but is he still needed for a philosopher?
And what would be the answer of Leibniz in that respect? So does he have a negative answer to that or a positive one?
I think he would say yes. Of course, God is what made the best of all possible worlds. But my great professor Franco Voltaggio, who wrote a book, What Leibniz Has Really Said, many years ago, he said to me, Brunella, what Leibniz meant was, this is the best possible of worlds. Better than this, it's impossible. so I don't know if we can read it in these two different ways.
What about the reception of Leibniz as part of the further sort of the post-humanist thinker and in transhumanism, in Deleuze, Foucault? I don't know. I'm not sure in how far they've dealt explicitly with Leibnizian thought. Maybe you could explain.
Hegel was a great admirator of Leibniz, not so much. Leibniz died poor and not recognized, as well as Spinoza. I have this image in mind, Leibniz going to Amsterdam to see Spinoza, talking about infinity, talking about teleology, and they both died poor and not recognized. Spinoza became a big star, after Marx, maybe, I don't know. Spinoza, when I studied in Urbino, it was the 70s or the 80s. There was the first great international congress about Spinoza. It was the great revival. Concerning Leibniz, we have Wiener, and the students of Wiener who go back to Leibniz. And now I find a lot of articles that try to reread Leibniz in the light of AI or cybernetics. Well, the one I mentioned before, Yu Kui, young Chinese philosopher, has an interesting reading of Leibniz as one who introduces organology. But actually, not so many today would reread Leibniz. In reversal, they read Spinoza in a new light. Not so much they do Leibniz.
Yeah,
but if you think of the wave particle ambiguity in the electron, in the atom, this is could be read as Leibnizian. Leibniz couldn't make experiments about that. So the craziness of the existence of the monads can become, an experimental evidence now.
But with Spinoza, he is now the big superstar, basically as part of one specific approach of critical posthumanism. Basically, everyone regards themselves as Spinoza's thinkers. So if we think about, the tradition maybe was starting with Donna Haraway, then continued by Catherine Hales, but now the sort of contemporary versions of that type of approach, which is strongly centered around Rosi Braidotti, the Italian philosopher who now works in Utrecht, and sort of her circles of the post-human approach is basically fully Spinozian. Is all trying, the only meaningful way of doing critical post-human thinking today would be in the Spinozian tradition.
Even before that, we had Tony Negri's book, controversial, but Spinoza again, and then we have Damasio, Spinoza, looking for Spinoza. So Spinoza is the big star. Leibniz, not so much, probably because of the metaphysics that is still heavy on his philosophy, but I'm sure that it can be reread in this light. And
the explicitly element, so in Norbert Wiener, in how far did in which of his writings did he actually deal with Leibniz? Is it how central was it?
I can't show them now, but there are maybe 4 or 5 contexts. That is articles, a few articles back to Leibniz, and then in Cybernetics he explicitly refers to Leibniz. Also in the other book, The Human Use of Human Beings refers to Leibniz. So there are many references quite to the point. Wiener seems to know Leibniz very well, very deeply. So very
I need to have a look into it. I mean, my next book, actually, which is coming out in September, will be called "We Have Always Been Cyborgs." So I'm drawing on the cybernetic traditions. And I will see whether, so far there's no reference to Leibniz, but maybe I should. It needs to be added eventually, or maybe in the next one. And in particular with sort of the cybernetic aspect, I mean, of Wiener, is this the specific Leibnizian take, or only with respect to the points you've mentioned in your presentation?
No, Wiener finds the common features in communication, that is information, which means the technique of reasoning or the technique of a cybernetic machine consists of responding to the external stimulus. Cybernetics stems from Kubernetes, which means the pilot in a boat that receives information from the boat, which receives information from the water, which is corrected by the pilot, and this is the recursiveness, the recursivity of the motion, of the cybernetic motion. The one effect moving, giving the next step, offering the next step to be done. So this is what Wiener finds interesting in Leibniz, because this recursivity means self-regulation, which means inner force, which means living force, force giver.
And talking about the living forces and what actually exists, and on the other hand, the digital, you stress sort of the tension between the digital as being concrete entities, binary entities, ones and zeros. On the other hand, sort of when you talk about the living, you rather had sort of a continuity of existence in mind, or did I misunderstand you in this respect?
This is interesting. 0-1 as a tool is extremely useful, because electrons in computers move like this, move in 0-1 possibilities, either yes or no, either one direction or not. But all reality occurs between 0 and 1. This is the continuism of Leibniz, which can be retrieved by Peirce. However, Peirce doesn't find himself to be Leibnizian. whatever happens in the world is never 0 or 1. This is a tool that uses these extremes as extreme cybernetic motion, extreme cybernetic. There are 2 limits, 0 and limits, but whatever happens in the world happens in the statistical more or less between 0 1, never 0, never 1, never false and never true.
Let me challenge you. Maybe we've got reasons to analyze actually the world as also consisting of concrete entities, in the sense of, I mean, there, according to some scientific theories, according to physics, energy can only consist of integral of multiple pluralities of the integral multiples of the Planck constant. So it's 1 times the Planck constant, twice the Planck constant, 3 times. So it seems as if the Planck constant is sort of such a minute entity, and any entity has to become a multiple, an integral multiple of this minute quantity of energy, and if this is the case, wouldn't that in the end confirm? Wouldn't that confirm that all energy, that everything, all the organisms out of which we're constituted, all the entities which exist, have to be integral multiples of this energy? And that would mean we do have like a minute type of monad, which, however, can interact with others, in contrast to the Leibnizian. So in that way, the world would be constituted out of binaries in the end, or at least out of discrete entities in the end.
No, it's not out of binaries, because when we talk about monad or quantum of energy, we are talking about statistics of energy. We do not have we can't measure that energy. This is why we call it a quantum, because it's not measurable. This is why we talk about the probability cloud, because electrons can be found only statistically. This is how physics today moves statistically and not deterministically. They do not determine what exists and how it exists. They can only reason statistically. When you say Planck constant, we're talking about statistics. Therefore, it's not true that 0, 1 exists. They are just tools to build a statistics of what exists. Can we say that principio individuationis is endless? Is endless, as the scholastic says. So if we want to individuate what really exists, we reach to the point of finding what monads. We don't find anything, any individuum. So this is the infinite divisibility of what exists, of these infinite machines that we are. So 0, 1 exists as extremes of a tool that is actually always inside, between 0 and 1. This was written in my book, Thinking Through Error. So if you ever touch on that, you have to quote me.
Okay. Well, this is in the end. This is actually a question which has elements for many transhumanist issues. Sort of when transhumanists talk about the possibility of mind uploading, that means we would have to be able to transfer our carbonate-based bodies, our organic bodies, onto a silicon-based body, and onto sort of a carbonate body into a binary entity, because obviously on a computer it would have to be binary, with consisting of zeros and ones, and we would want to be uploaded without any loss. So obviously, if we have a personality, if we want to be uploaded, then nothing must have gone lost as part of this process. But this obviously can only occur if that what we are made of in itself is binary. Otherwise, something would have to be lost. If we are continuous entities which get transferred into binary ones, into zeros and ones, then something would be lost, and that wouldn't be in our interest in the first place. So just about reflecting about the possibility of mind uploading, which many people do, from Elon Musk today to Ray Kurzweil. This is exactly an issue, a philosophical issue, which needs to be discussed with. Does reality, does maybe an organic reality, can that be reduced to discrete entities, or is it actually a continuum? So this is an extremely relevant and fascinating philosophical issue.
It deals with constant transformation of nature, or deformation, because once that our mind, provided that there's a good reason to do that, once that our mind is uploaded, it becomes something else. It is deformed into or transformed into something else. Why not? If nature is a technique, we can add to nature, to our organic entity, our organic system, the uploaded mind. The problem is that necessary or not?
Exactly.
But also maybe some, there can be some legal aspects, related to that. And maybe here I would like, to ask Aziza, Professor Alibri, about that. She's also a lawyer, a professor of law. So whether we can also find, a way to, deal with this issue, mind uploading and so on, also from the point of view of law. So what can be the legal aspects of these experiments, of these possibilities? Beyond the philosophical reasoning. So maybe we can say something about that. Question mark. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an important question again. But I have to tell you that I've been taking in so much and new thinking from this program. I don't think I would like to jump in and give off-the-cuff comments about either in the law or in philosophy. I'm really going to take a long time thinking about this, and I will have, God willing, a lot of things to say about it. It's extremely interesting and important. Thank you.
So, yeah, many thanks. And there's also Nefeli Mizuraka. She says, she stresses what an interesting, stimulating conversation this was. And this was indeed the case. So, thanks a lot, Brunella, for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you. And Fabrizio, I hope we continue with this discussion. Maybe we can have Aziza come and elaborate on that further.
So we will definitely continue with this discussion. Maybe a final word also from Fabrizio, or we go in the round, and then before we close the session, Fabrizio, do you want to?
Yes, of course. I want to thank Brunella, all of you, for this great opportunity to discuss these issues that are actually, on the borders of various disciplines. So that's what is really also interesting, right? Many different disciplines. So this is not just about philosophy. This is not just about humanism or post-humanism, maybe, which is the central focus of our lecture series here. But it is something that really goes beyond. That is what I really like about this series of lectures that Professor Sorgner and myself have thought about. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening. It's been great that all of you have been here with us. This video will stay on YouTube, so many more chances for everyone to visit. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll be seeing each other back hopefully soon.
Thank you.
Bye.